The Many Variants of a Classic Tale by Ashley Hansen. And I went with the title Cinder Who because as we get into the slides, we'll see that Cinderella is not always a female. So Ella Enchanted by Gail Carson Levine, 1997. So the overarching storyline for Ella Enchanted was she was born crying and was bestowed the gift of obedience by Lucinda the fairy. She is forced to oblige to the whims and desires of everyone who wishes her to do something. Her mother dies and Father Sir Peter marries Dame Olga. She has evil stepsisters, Haiti and Olive, who she actually first met in boarding school. Prince Carr is in love with Ella and uses a glass slipper to make entry into the home to find Ella. But in this story, the glass slipper isn't the means of which finding her. It's actually used to make contact with her. Ella is abused by the stepmother and by her stepsisters. And the spell is broken when Ella refuses Carr's wishes for Ella to marry him. And Ella actually chooses to marry Carr as she knows he no longer could be harmed by the spell. So she actually refuses his wish, and that's when the spell is broken. So The Irish Cinder Lad by Shirley Clemo and illustrated by Loretta Krupninski. Is an Irish folklore-based spin on Cinderella, but Cinder Lad because he's a male. And he was bestowed the gift of courage and strength by a magical bull, which is actually very relevant to Irish folklore because cows were seen as being mythical creatures that came from the sea. His mother also dies and his father remarries. A Beacon, who is the Cinder Lad, is mistreated and abused by his stepmother and 3 stepsisters. He defeats a giant and takes his boots, slays a dragon with the bull's tail, and saves the princess. The princess uses the boot to find Beacon and to marry him. So in both stories, we have similarities based in the maltreatment of their stepmothers and stepsisters. And then the third we have is Walt Disney's Cinderella, right? The cartoon classic that most of my generation and those before me are very familiar with, where her mother dies and father remarries. Cinderella is abused and mistreated by her stepmother and sisters, which again is the overarching theme that connects all 3 of the different stories. Relies on comfort and companionship from the animals within the castle. The fairy godmother grants her wish to attend the prince's ball, and this is where she falls in love with the prince. And she leaves behind her glass slipper where he uses this to find her. The glass slipper is used to find Cinderella, like I just said, and then in the end, Cinderella is able to marry the prince. So kindness and courage is all part of Cinder Who's nature, whether it's Cinderella or Cinder Lad. The overarching theme is kindness, no matter what version I read. All maintained a positive and caring outlook on life despite the abuses and traumas they endured, and all of them put others before themselves throughout the whole entire stories. All lived happily ever after, quote unquote, as a direct result of their resiliency. So I included this image right here, which I'm sure we're all familiar with if you know the Walt Disney version of the film. No matter how your heart is grieving, if you keep on believing, the dream that you wish will come true. So in analyzing the differences, I picked up on cultural differences. So each version relies on cultural relativeness for creating the stark differences in the overarching narrative of the story. The Irish Cinder Lad, it was an excellent example of the role of using cultural context for reaching the reader. The tale is rich in Irish folklore and increases the reader's knowledge of such culture, hence why there is a Cinderella story for almost every culture, like we learned throughout this week's lectures and readings. So in continuing this, it's used to capture the hearts and minds of the current generation. So with the examples of a textbook, picture book, and film, and the narration and depiction of the storyline, the significance of these cultural differences is keeping the art of storytelling relevant for future generations. And here are my references. So have a good week.